She abandoned her disabled daughter. Don't give her a dime. That was the first sentence. I'll never forget the way it cut through the room, tinny and hollow through the FBI's tape recorder, but sharp enough to split me in two. I didn't flinch. Not outwardly. I've lived long enough to know that showing pain in front of strangers only feeds the story they've already written about you. So I just folded my hands on the edge of the scratched conference table, nodding like I was being read a weather report. Though, my chest was a locked furnace, heat pressing against the ribs, begging to spill out. This is not just another story. It's a chilling journey through betrayal, lies, and a revenge you'll never forget. Don't miss a single second, watch until the very end. Do you recognize the voice? The agent asked. His tie was crooked, his coffee smelled burnt, and his eyes kept drifting to the folder with my name on it. I let the silence stretch. Recognize it? Of course I recognized it. I was born to that voice. I'd heard it sing lullabies, scold me for muddy shoes, gossip on the phone late at night when she thought I was asleep. And now, decades later, there it was again. Only colder, polished with performance, telling strangers that I was a monster who'd walked away from a child I never even had. Yes, I said finally, calm as stone. That's my mother. The agent scribbled something in his notes. He didn't notice the way I smiled, just faintly. That was my advantage. He thought I was here as the victim, waiting for him to solve my problem. He had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead, already writing my own ending. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the fluorescent light above us. It flickered every few seconds, casting a quick shadow across the agent's face, like the room itself couldn't decide whether to expose or conceal. He pressed a button and the recording continued. We've suffered enough. She doesn't deserve forgiveness. If you can give, please give. It will help us care for her child since she refuses to. The lies poured out of the little speaker like poison, smooth and rehearsed. I wanted to laugh. My child. I've never been pregnant, never cradled a baby of my own, and yet here was my family spinning fairy tales to strangers online, collecting donations as if I'd abandoned a daughter with special needs. $130,000. The number glared from the file on the table. Money raised not for a real child, not for a real tragedy, but for a ghost they'd invented in my name. And the worst part? People believed it. Neighbors stopped talking to me. Old friends avoided my calls. Even the cashier at the grocery store who'd once asked about my garden, started ringing me up in silence, her eyes cold with quiet judgment. All because of this story. All because of her voice. Do you want us to keep playing? The agent asked. No, I said too quickly, then softened my tone. That's enough. He nodded and turned off the tape. The sudden silence was louder than the recording. I stared at the blank wall across from me. Beige paint peeling at the corners, a tack hole where a clock should have been. And in that stillness I thought of the hidden advantage I hadn't shared yet, the one piece they didn't know. The donor list. The real one. I had it. I knew every name, every email, every transaction. Proof. Evidence. A loaded weapon waiting in my purse under the table. My mother's voice might have broken me in the past. But this time I had something sharper. The agent cleared his throat. You understand the seriousness here. If this really is your mother, we'll need your full cooperation. It could take months. I tilted my head. Months, I repeated as though trying on the word. Months for him maybe. Not for me. I glanced at the clock on my wrist instead, the second hand ticking steady and sure. Time was the one thing I refused to waste anymore. Not after all they'd stolen from me. My reputation, my friendships, even the simple comfort of walking down Main Street without whispers behind my back. No, months wouldn't do. I already had my own timeline. When I left the office, the September air hit sharp against my face, cool and damp with the scent of rain that hadn't fallen yet. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a row of faded white lines and a lone street lamp buzzing with moths. I paused by my car, keys in hand, and let myself feel it, just for a moment. The heaviness in my chest, the sting behind my eyes, the taste of copper on my tongue where I'd bitten down to keep steady inside. How could she? My own mother. Not just to betray me, but to invent a child, to use innocence as her weapon, to twist the world's pity into her profit. I closed my eyes. The answer was simple: because she could. Because she thought I was too weak, too broken, too desperate to fight back. She'd forgotten who raised me. I drove home slowly, the wipers squeaking over a windshield smeared with mist. Every red light seemed to last longer than usual. Every shadow on the roadside stretched thin and strange. I noticed things I usually ignored. The way the gas station attendant avoided eye contact. The way the billboard on the corner advertised another charity drive with a smiling child. It was everywhere now. The lie had soaked into the town like oil in water, impossible to wash out. By the time I pulled into my driveway, night had settled in. The porch light flickered weakly, same as the one in that FBI office, and for a moment it felt like the world itself was hinting at something. Flicker on, flicker off. Truth lie. Exposure, concealment. I unlocked the door and stepped into the stillness of my house. Too quiet. Too neat. My mother's voice echoed in my head. She abandoned her disabled daughter. I set my purse on the table and pulled out the folder. The donor list. Pages of names, numbers, addresses. Proof they hadn't thought I'd ever see. I ran my fingers over the paper, steadying my breath. They had used my name to build this story. Now I would use theirs to dismantle it. The phone rang. A shrill, ordinary sound, but it cut through the house like a knife. I let it ring twice, 3 times, then answered. Hello. Silence. Then faintly a breath. Familiar. Hesitant. Don't you dare, my mother's voice whispered. I froze, the donor list still in my hand. He knew. Somehow she knew I had it. Don't I dare what? I asked, my tone even calm. You'll ruin everything, she hissed. You'll ruin us. I almost laughed. There was no us anymore. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch again, just like I had in that FBI office. Silence was my weapon now. She broke first. You come here. Tomorrow. Don't involve them. And then the line went dead. I stood there, the phone still warm in my hand, staring at the donor list on the table. My mother's voice was no longer just a recording in a government office. It was here, alive, pressing at the edges of my life, daring me to step forward. I slipped the papers back into my purse, smoothed my blouse, and took a long, steady breath. Tomorrow then. Face to face. And she had no idea what I had planned. That's how I left it. But when I woke the next morning, sunlight creeping weakly through the blinds, I knew I couldn't walk into her house unprepared. She'd always been clever with words, skilled at twisting a story until even I doubted my own memory. If I was going to face her, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. I needed leverage. The donor list was already sitting on the kitchen table where I'd left it the night before. Neat columns of names, addresses, and dollar amounts. I sipped my coffee, too bitter, but it kept my hands steady, and traced my finger down the page until I landed on one name that made me pause. My cousin Tommy. It figured. He'd been trouble since he was a teenager, always chasing fast money, never keeping a job longer than a few months. Now he was in his 40s, still flashing smiles at anyone gullible enough to lend him a dime. Seeing his name tied to those donations lit a fuse in me. If my mother was the architect of this lie, Tommy was one of her builders. And if I was going to unravel the house they'd built on my ruin, I'd start by pulling out his bricks. I knew where to find him. Tommy wasn't the type to keep secrets about his habits. For years I'd heard whispers about his gambling, low-stakes poker nights in someone's basement, then slot machines at the reservation casino, then bigger tables downtown when he thought luck had finally swung his way. By mid-afternoon I was parked outside the riverfront casino, watching the entrance through my windshield. The air smelled of exhaust and fried food drifting from the nearby diner. I'd never been the type to sit in cars like this, waiting, watching. But now it felt natural, almost too natural, like I'd been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. Sure enough, there he was. Same leather jacket he wore 20 years ago, belly pushing against the zipper, hair slicked back with too much gel. He strutted through the glass doors like a man walking into church, certain salvation waited just beyond the threshold. I let him go in first, then followed, the automatic doors whooshing open with a wave of cigarette smoke and the clatter of machines. The air was thick, artificial. No windows, no clocks, just flashing lights designed to make you forget time. I spotted him quickly. He was hunched over a blackjack table, grinning at the dealer, tossing chips like he owned them. His laugh carried across the room, loud and reckless. I didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, I sat at a slot machine nearby, pretending to play. I fed $1 into the machine and pressed the button, the screen flashing nonsense. My eyes weren't on the reels, they were on him. Hours passed. His pile of chips rose, then fell, then rose again. I watched the pattern. I watched his temper flare when he lost, his charm return when he won. By the time the dealer changed shifts, his pile was nearly gone, and his grin had thinned into a grimace. That's when I made my move. I walked up behind him, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "Rough night, Tommy?" He jumped, nearly dropping his last 2 chips. "Aunt," he stammered, catching himself. Hey, didn't expect to see you here." I smiled. Controlled. "No, I bet you didn't." His eyes darted to the table, then back to me. "What are you doing here?" "Same as you," I said, my tone light. "Taking risks." We stepped away from the table, down a quieter hallway lined with restrooms and ATMs. The carpet smelled like stale beer, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, shifting nervously. "You don't belong here," he muttered. "Neither do you," I replied. "But you keep coming back, don't you? Can't help yourself." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I said, pulling the folded donor list from my purse. I didn't open it, just let him see the edge of the paper. His face drained of color. "What's that?" he asked, though he already knew. "Evidence," I said simply. "Names, amounts, records. Yours included." He swallowed hard. You don't understand. I was just trying to help. Your mom said." "My mother," I cut in, my voice firm, "lied. And you went along with it." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but no words came out. I leaned closer, keeping my voice low. "Here's what I do understand, Tommy. You're in debt. And the people you owe aren't the kind who forgive easily. If they knew you had extra money coming in, if they knew you were part of this little scheme, well, let's just say they'd be interested." He froze. His eyes darted to the cameras above us, then back to me. "You wouldn't." I smiled faintly. "Wouldn't I?" Silence hung between us, thick as smoke. Finally, he whispered, "What do you want?" I hadn't planned this part in detail, but the words came easily. Names. Who else was in on it? Who organized what? Who took the biggest share? He shifted from foot to foot. "If I tell you, she'll kill me." "She won't have the chance," I said. "Not if I get there first." He stared at me, searching my face, maybe hoping I was bluffing. But I wasn't. I held his gaze steady, my heartbeat calm, steady, almost soothing. At last he sighed. "All right. Fine. But not here." "Tomorrow," I said. "You'll meet me. Alone. And you'll bring everything you have." He nodded reluctantly. When I left the casino, night had fallen. The parking lot buzzed with neon signs reflecting off rain-slick pavement. I breathed in the damp air, my chest lighter than it had been in months. It wasn't victory yet, not even close. But it was the first thread. And when you pull one thread, the whole fabric eventually unravels. I slid into my car, started the engine, and glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked older than I remembered, lines deeper, eyes sharper. For the first time I didn't mind. Because those lines, those sharp edges, they weren't weakness. They were proof I'd survived long enough to fight back. And I wasn't finished. Not even close. The next morning I woke earlier than usual, the kind of wakefulness that doesn't come from rest but from determination. The house was still, quiet enough that I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. I sat at the kitchen table with the donor list spread out again. My cousin's name was only one of many. My eyes caught on another. My Aunt Linda. Linda, the polished one. The one who never missed Sunday service, who hosted Thanksgiving dinners with tablecloths pressed so sharp you'd swear they could cut your fingers. She'd always been the respectable one, the one neighbors praised, the one my mother pointed to whenever she wanted to remind me how much better I could have been. And yet there she was. Not just a donor. A collector. A contact point for at least 20 contributions. I sat back in my chair, pressing my palms flat against the table. Respectability had always been her armor. What would happen if I stripped it away? By mid-afternoon I drove to her neighborhood. The houses here all looked the same. White siding, trimmed hedges, flags swaying gently on porches. Perfect on the outside, secrets buried beneath. I parked 2 streets over and walked the rest of the way, my shoes crunching softly against gravel. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from a distant chimney. Linda's house stood tall, shutters painted navy, wreath on the door. Picture perfect. But as I approached, I noticed something. A small slip of paper caught in the edge of her mailbox. Curiosity tugged at me. I glanced around, no one in sight, then pulled it free. It was a flyer for a charity auction scheduled the following week. And there, in bold letters at the bottom, was Linda's name as co-chair. A laugh almost escaped me. Even now, even after stealing in my name, she was still holding herself up as the patron saint of good causes. That gave me an idea. Instead of knocking, I slipped the flyer into my purse and walked around the block to the corner cafe. I ordered tea, Earl Grey, the bag bobbing in steaming water, and pulled out my phone. Linda's husband, Richard, had never been discreet. For years, whispers about his late meetings floated through family gatherings. Linda brushed them aside with a smile too tight, too bright. I typed his name into the search bar. Within minutes I found what I needed. Pictures. Not scandalous enough for tabloids but clear enough. Him leaning too close to a woman at a hotel bar. Him again hand-brushing her arm in a way that wasn't professional. Evidence. Not fabricated. Not exaggerated. Just truth, the kind Linda couldn't ignore if it landed in her lap. That night I sat at my dining table with a plain envelope. No return address. No signature. Just the photograph slipped inside, folded neatly. On the outside I wrote one word. Truth. The next morning, before the sun was up, I drove back to her neighborhood. I walked casually like any early riser out for a stroll, and slid the envelope under her doormat. My heart raced as I walked away, but my steps were steady. 2 days later, the first crack appeared. I was in the grocery store standing in line with a basket of apples and bread when I saw Linda. Normally she would have waved, forced a smile, maybe even made a comment about my lonely shopping habits. But not this time. Her hair was unbrushed, her blouse wrinkled, her eyes shadowed like she hadn't slept. She kept glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be following her. When our eyes met, she froze. For a moment I thought she'd speak. Instead, she dropped her basket on the counter and walked out, leaving everything behind. The cashier shook her head. Poor thing, she muttered. She hasn't looked right all week. I said nothing, but inside I felt the smallest flicker of satisfaction. The portrait was beginning to tear. The real test came at Sunday service. I hadn't stepped foot in that church in years, but I knew Linda would be there. He always was. So I dressed carefully, simple black dress, clean shoes, and slipped into a back pew before the service began. The church smelled of old wood and wax, sunlight streaming through colored glass. Families filled the pews, children whispering, hymnals opening. And then Linda arrived. Her usual entrance was a performance. Chin high, smile warm, hand resting lightly on Richard's arm. But not today. Today she walked quickly, almost stumbling, her lips pressed tight. Richard followed a step behind, face pale, avoiding everyone's eyes. Whispers started almost immediately. People noticed. People always notice. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. During the announcements, the pastor thanked the volunteers for the upcoming charity auction. Especially our co-chair Linda Reynolds, he said warmly. All eyes turned to her. Normally she would have stood, waved modestly. Instead she stayed seated, staring at the floor, hands trembling in her lap. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, until the pastor cleared his throat and moved on. I watched from the back, unseen, and knew the blade had cut. That afternoon I received a call. No number displayed. I answered. You, Linda's voice cracked on the other end, low and desperate. What did you do? I leaned back in my chair, letting her words hang. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean. The pictures. The notes. They're talking. Linda, I said softly, I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe you should ask Richard. Her breath hitched, sharp and shaky. For the first time in my life she sounded small. Not polished, not perfect, just human, frightened and unraveling. Why are you doing this? She whispered. I closed my eyes, the donor list clear in my mind. Because you helped destroy me. And now I'm returning the favor. She gasped, then the line went dead. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, shadows stretching across the walls. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart still pounding from the call. I'd always believed revenge would taste sweet. But it was more complicated than that. It was heavy, layered with old wounds and new fire. Part of me wanted to cry, another part wanted to laugh, and another part, perhaps the strongest, wanted to keep going. The portrait was tearing, yes. But the picture wasn't complete yet. Because behind Linda, behind Tommy, behind all the cousins and uncles and polished family dinners, there was still the face I dreaded most. My mother. And she was waiting. Not in some abstract way. Not like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. No, she was waiting in a house only 10 miles from mine, the same house where I grew up, where the walls still smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish, where the air was thick with her rules and her judgment. After Linda's call, I knew the time for circling was over. If Tommy had been the first thread and Linda the first tear in the canvas, then my mother was the portrait itself. The center. The frame. If I wanted the picture to finally fall apart, I had to face her directly. So I went. It was evening when I pulled into her driveway. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with bruised purple and fading gold. Porch light glowing faintly. Curtains drawn. I sat in the car for a full minute, engine ticking as it cooled, hands gripping the steering wheel. She had called me once already. Told me to come. Told me not to involve the FBI. That alone told me she was afraid. But I needed more than her fear. I needed her undoing. I stepped out, gravel crunching under my shoes. My chest tightened with every step toward the door. She opened it before I could knock. "Come in," she said sharply, her voice low but clipped as though she'd been rehearsing the words all day. The living room looked the same as it always had. Neat, proper, not a cushion out of place. The scent of her rose potpourri hung in the air, heavy and artificial. The only new addition was the tension buzzing so loud I could almost hear it. I set my purse on the armchair, folding my hands calmly in front of me. "You've caused enough trouble," she began, pacing across the rug. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes darting like she was looking for cracks in the wallpaper. "First you embarrassed the family, now you." I raised a hand. "Stop. I didn't embarrass anyone. You did. You and your stories." Her lips pressed into a line. For a moment I thought she might actually deny it, keep spinning lies until the room itself drowned in them. But instead she turned her back to me, standing at the window staring out at the dark yard. "Do you think you're the first one to be sacrificed for the family?" she asked quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and strange. That was new. That wasn't a denial. That was a confession in her own twisted way. "What do you mean, sacrificed?" I asked. She didn't answer. Her reflection in the glass looked smaller somehow, shoulders slumped as though the weight of years pressed down all at once. Finally she turned. "They needed someone to blame. And you were always the easiest. You never had children, never had a husband to defend you, never had a life anyone else wanted to protect. So yes, we used you." Her voice cracked on that last word, though she quickly swallowed it down. Something inside me stilled. I had expected lies, denial, maybe even anger. But not this. Not her speaking the truth as if it were nothing more than a household chore she'd finished. I sat slowly on the edge of the sofa, my body cold, my fingers tightening around the cushion seams. "You invented a daughter," I said, steady but sharp. "You told people I abandoned her. You made them believe I was heartless." "You don't understand," she snapped, spinning toward me. "People give more when there's a child involved. They don't care about adults, especially not ones like you." Her words cut, deliberate and cruel. But I didn't rise. I let them settle in my chest like stones. Then I leaned forward. "And the money? What did you do with it?" She hesitated. Just a flicker, but I saw it. A shift in her eyes. "Gone," she said finally. "Bills. Debts. Things you wouldn't understand." I almost laughed. Because I did understand. I understood more than she realized. That night I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just watched. Every flicker of her eyes, every twitch of her mouth, every time her hands twisted the hem of her blouse. She was unraveling whether she admitted it or not. So I left. Quietly, calmly, without slamming the door. I left her in that perfect living room with her perfect cushions and her bowl of potpourri. But I didn't leave her in peace. The first call came the next night. She answered the phone to silence. Just her own breath echoing back, the faint creak of the line. She hung up. The second call came the night after. A recording this time. A child's voice, soft, fragile, whispering, "Mama, why did you leave me?" She slammed the phone down. But I knew she wouldn't sleep. Not that night. Not for many nights after. Within a week she looked different. I saw her at the pharmacy one afternoon. Her hair, usually pinned neat, was falling in strands around her face. Her eyes were shadowed, her hands trembled as she paid for a bag of pills. She didn't see me, but I watched. Watched her shoulders hunch under the fluorescent lights. Watched her count the pills twice before slipping them into her purse. The woman who once stood taller than anyone I knew now looked fragile, brittle, as if one sharp word might shatter her. I didn't stop with phone calls. Sometimes she'd come home to find her answering machine blinking. She'd press play and a child's laugh would spill into the room, distorted and eerie. Other times she'd hear faint knocks at her door late at night, though no one was there when she opened it. The neighbors whispered about her lights staying on until dawn, about how she paced the rooms as though chased by ghosts. But I wasn't giving her ghosts. I was giving her the truth. The truth that her lies had weight and that weight was finally pressing back. One night, close to midnight, my phone rang. Her number. I answered calmly. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, raw from lack of sleep. "Doing what?" I asked, my tone steady. "The calls. The voices. The noises. It's you, isn't it?" I let silence hang for a long moment. Then I said softly, "You wanted a child, Mother. Now you have one. And she's calling for you." She sobbed, a sound so small and broken I barely recognized it. Then the line went dead. I should have felt guilt, regret, some lingering pull of daughterly love. But instead I felt clarity. For the first time in decades, the balance between us had shifted. She wasn't the one with power anymore. Each night she spent without sleep, each shadow she feared, each whisper she thought she heard, it wasn't just punishment. It was the truth made real. Because if she could create a lie big enough to destroy me, I could create a truth big enough to destroy her. And still I knew I wasn't finished. The cracks were spreading, yes. But the portrait hadn't fully collapsed. She hadn't admitted everything. Not yet. And until she did, neither of us would sleep. That thought carried me through the next day like a shadow. I moved through the motions, boiled water for tea, swept the kitchen floor, folded laundry, but every action felt mechanical. My mind was fixed on her. My mother. Alone in that house, pacing her perfect living room, haunted by the voices of a child she invented. But haunting wasn't enough anymore. She needed to face what she'd done. Not in whispers, not in hints. In full. Out loud. I needed to hear her say it. And I needed her to understand that it wasn't just about the money or the lies or the family's whispers. It was about me. About what she had stolen and who I had become because of it. So I called her. She answered on the first ring. Her voice was thin, brittle. "Hello. Mother," I said evenly. "We need to talk." Pause. Then a shaky breath. I can't. Not now." "Yes," I said sharper. "Now. Tonight." Another silence. Then reluctantly, "Come." By the time I pulled into her driveway, night had settled thick and heavy, the kind of night where the air feels damp and every sound echoes longer than it should. The porch light was on, but dim, flickering slightly. I stepped out of the car, purse in hand, and walked up the path. The door opened before I knocked. She stood there, smaller than I remembered. Her hair was messy, her face pale, dark circles bruising the skin beneath her eyes. "Come in," she whispered. I stepped inside. The house smelled the same, lavender potpourri, wood polish, but under it lingered something sour. Fear. Sleeplessness. Decay. She led me into the living room where the curtains were drawn tight. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the table, cold. She sank into the armchair, hands twisting in her lap. I stayed standing. "You win," she said suddenly, her voice breaking. "Is that what you wanted? To see me like this? Broken?" I tilted my head. "Not broken. Honest." She flinched at the word. "You lied," I continued, my voice steady. "You told the world I abandoned a child. You raised money on my name, turned neighbors into judges, turned me into a villain. And for what? To pay bills? To hide your own mistakes." Her hands clenched tighter. "You don't understand." "I do," I cut her off. "I understand perfectly. You chose me because I was the easiest target. No husband to defend me. No children to speak for me. Alone. Disposable." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then quietly I pulled the donor list from my purse and laid it on the table between us. The paper slid across the polished wood with a whisper. She stared at it, her face draining of color. "You know what this is," I said. Her lips trembled. "Where did you?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is this: I could take it to the FBI. To the news. To every neighbor who still smiles politely while whispering behind my back. I could burn down everything you've built with this one stack of paper." Her breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. "But I won't," I continued, leaning closer. "Not yet. Because I want something first. I want you to say it. Out loud. Every word. I want you to confess." Her eyes darted to the curtains as if someone might be listening. Her hands shook. I can't," she whispered. "You can," I pressed. "You will." She looked at me, then really looked at me. And for the first time in my life I saw fear in her eyes. Not disappointment, not judgment, not cold dismissal. Fear. Her voice cracked. "Yes. I lied. We lied. There was no child. We made her up. We said you abandoned her. We raised money, all of us, and I let it." The words hung in the room, heavy, final. Something in my chest loosened. After all the whispers, the rumors, the shame, hearing her say it out loud was like opening a window in a suffocating room. But I wasn't finished. "Do you know what you've done to me?" I asked, my voice trembling now, not from weakness but from the sheer weight of everything I'd carried. "Do you know what it's like to walk into a store and feel the cashier's eyes burning through you? To lose friends who once swore they'd stand by you? To live with the shadow of a child I never had, a ghost chained to my name?" Tears rolled down her face, but she didn't speak. I leaned closer. "You created that ghost. And now she's real. She lives in this house, in your sleepless nights, in every whisper you hear in the dark. You sold her to the world, and now she belongs to you." She sobbed openly, covering her face with her hands. I stood, slipping the donor list back into my purse. My work here was done. She had confessed not just to me but to herself. And she would live with those words every day from now on. But before I left, I stepped closer, bending down so my voice brushed her ear. "You sold a child that never existed. Now you'll die knowing she's real, because I became her." She froze, hands falling away from her face, eyes wide with shock. I straightened, walked to the door and opened it. The night air rushed in, cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of rain. I didn't look back. As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The lines on my face were still there, deeper than before, but they no longer looked like marks of age. They looked like armor. Proof. I thought about Tommy, about Linda, about all the whispers and lies. Their portraits had been torn apart, their secrets exposed. But my mother, she was the cage. And now her own lie was the lock that sealed it. For years I had been the one trapped inside her story. But not anymore. Now she was the prisoner, and the ghost she created would never let her sleep again. I felt no guilt. No regret. Only clarity. Because survival, I realized, doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes survival looks like revenge. And revenge had finally set me free. The lie she created became her cage, and I was the one holding the key. If this story kept you hooked, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe now and join a community where every story reveals the power of survival, justice, and revenge.